Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever time it is, wherever you are tuning in. Thank you so much for joining me today for this next Facebook Live and Instagram Live offering. This is a Dharma talk that I'm titling A Mindful and Heartful Path. And so this is part 4 of a 4-part series where I'm covering a secular reading of what's known in the Buddhist tradition as the Four Noble Truths or the Eightfold Path. And so today I'm going to pick up kind of where I left off last week, on last Thursday morning in Thailand, Wednesday evening in the States. I offered a talk where I talked a bit about the Eightfold Path. And I covered the first 2 limbs, the first 2 folds, if you will, on the Eightfold Path, right view or whole view or appropriate view and appropriate intention. So before I get into the bulk of today's offering, which I'm very much looking forward to, I'd like to give just a little bit of an announcement here. So this 4-part series, and by the way, you don't have to have seen the first 3 sessions of this to receive benefit from today's offering. These talks are all standalone, but they're given as a way of kind of leading up to an online meditation program that I'm offering entitled Awakened Living. And so this online meditation program is a 12-week program. It's really designed to allow the participants to meet and embrace life with wisdom, kindness, curiosity, and care. And in cultivating a way of life which allows that, we're going to be taking a very deep and secular look at some of the earliest teachings of the Buddha. So this will be really drawing from the Buddhist traditions, both the early traditions of Theravada, the Mahayana traditions. I'll also be drawing from Neuroplasticity, in particular the teachings of Rick Hanson, some others. We'll be looking at a little bit perhaps at Ram Dass, some of the Sufi poet Rumi, and many, many other areas that I'll be drawing from. I like to paint these offerings with a very wide brush, so to speak. So the online course, Awakened Living, is a 12-week program. We launch on December 1st and it runs to February 9th. Meeting on Tuesday evening, Section 1 from 7 p.m. to 10 p.m. East Coast time. Section 2 runs from 7 a.m. to 10 a.m. East Coast time. Section 2 is really designed to cater more to Europe, although if early morning appeals to you in the States, you're welcome to join. Or if later in the evening appeals to people in Asia and Australia and New Zealand, also welcome. So, Awakened Living, meeting life with wisdom, kindness, curiosity, and care. It's really targeting the teachings around suffering and the end of suffering. And it's part 1 of a 3-part series. The second 12-week program that'll be offered, probably launching in April, is around embracing change and impermanence. And towards the autumn of 2022, I'll be launching a course, another 12-week course, around the topic of emptiness or non-self. And so from the Buddhist tradition, these are what's known as the 3 marks of existence. If you're a living being, we all encounter some form of struggle in our life, some form of suffering, and the desire to be free from that suffering. We all, as living beings, also encounter change and impermanence. That's the nature of this existence, is we're all in this river of change. And we all are what in the Buddhist tradition is known as a non-self. In other words, this self that we experience as being a fixed, permanent entity is actually a fluid, contingent process. And so I won't go too much into that now. I know that can feel like a lot just hearing that sentence. But if you're curious about the teachings on non-self, please do send me a message, email me through the website, suchsweetthunder.org, or you can message me here, and I'm happy to offer some more teachings around non-self. But for today, I'm going to go ahead and launch into the talk. Just to round out this announcement here, if you are interested in signing up for this really, really exciting program, I'm very much looking forward to offering this Awakened Living course. You can register on my website, suchsweetthunder.org. You could also register simply by messaging me and saying, yes, I want to sign up for the program, and I'll get you registered, signed up for that. If you need more information about the program, also that you could visit the website, and all of the information is there that you need on the retreats and programs page. Or you could send me a message and say, I need more information, and I'm happy to answer any questions as well. Okay. So launching into this talk, rounding out the 6 last limbs of the Eightfold Path. And so, as a way of moving into this offering today, I just want to read here just a very short quote from the Buddha, from his first discourse. The Buddha said, "And this is the path with 8 branches, appropriate seeing, thinking, talking, acting, working, trying, recollecting, and concentrating." And so when I read that, for me, that really is kind of an answer to the question, how do we live and flourish? And so this eightfold path, or this path with 8 branches or limbs, can be seen as an offering, an invitation to bring mindfulness to all of these aspects of our life. So as I mentioned last talk I gave, I spoke in detail about appropriate view and appropriate intention. If you have a Buddhist background, you might be used to the translation right view, right intention, and so forth. I find the translation right to be quite problematic. It doesn't really speak to what's being offered here. It could be right as in the right amount or the right measure. But the problem is when we hear the word right, we often think of right versus wrong. And then it becomes this list of rules that we have to adhere to or believe in order to be a good person or a good Buddhist. Anybody can practice these practices. You don't have to be a Buddhist. In fact, the Buddha wasn't a Buddhist, and he wasn't teaching to Buddhists. So these teachings and practices are available for everyone. So I covered right view or appropriate view, appropriate intention, which is the wisdom branch of the Eightfold Path. And now I'm going to move into sila. Sila is the Sanskrit word, the Pali word, which means ethics. Appropriate action, appropriate speech, and appropriate livelihood. So, again, this isn't a teaching that's meant to set up a right versus wrong. but it's an invitation to bring mindfulness to these very basic, almost obvious ways that we interact with the world. Right? Action, speech, and livelihood. So it's not a set of rules, but it's more of an ethics of uncertainty. It's more an invitation to cultivate a set of skills so that we can meet the present moment as it's arising and move to engage in the present moment in a way that doesn't cause suffering for ourselves and for others. There's quite a famous passage in the Zen tradition where a monk approaches the Zen master Yunmen and asks Yunmen, what are the teachings of a whole lifetime? And Yunmen said, an appropriate statement. An appropriate statement is the culmination of a lifetime of teaching and practice. In other words, interacting and engaging with others and with our experience of life in a way that doesn't cause suffering for ourselves and for others. So really learning to become skilled at living. And the Buddha often compared the practices of the mindfulness and bringing mindfulness to the Eightfold Path to that of a wood turner and a farmer and a fletcher, someone who shapes an arrow. And so these are artisans, right? These are skills. In one famous passage, the Buddha says, just as a wood turner turns a piece of wood and knows that they're making a long turn. When we practice mindfulness, we know that we're breathing in. We know that we're breathing out. The wood turner knows that they're making a long turn, knows that they're making a short turn, and so forth. So it's just this bringing a type of mindful awareness to even the simplest aspects of our life. And so in this ethics branch of the Eightfold Path, we're really cultivating a type of awareness in our mind, in our thinking process, so that we can begin to distinguish and discern the difference between unwholesome and wholesome patterns, unskillful and unskillful ways of being, so that we develop this very clear understanding of the types of thoughts that we want to cultivate and the types of thoughts that we want to let go of. And so it starts with right or appropriate speech or skillful speech, the Pali word, the Sanskrit word or term, samavacha. Samavacha, appropriate speech. And so the Buddha actually gives a few types of speech that we want to generally avoid. He says false speech, harsh speech, idle speech, divisive speech. But again, this isn't that we, hold this list up or hold this list in our mind, and then when we go to engage somebody in conversation, we're, is this harsh? Is this idle? Is this false? Because if you're holding that in your mind and you're trying to converse with somebody, you're just going to end up, sounding awkward at best, right? So this is really an invitation to bring mindfulness to our speech itself. One of my teachers offered this technique of listening to the sound of your own voice while you're speaking. And I find this to be really quite effective. Because if you're really mindful of how your body's feeling in the present moment while you're talking, if you begin to say something false, your body will respond to that or react to that. There'll be a tension around the heart or in the jaw perhaps, or maybe you'll get flush. Your body will react to false speech. Same with harsh speech, idle speech. There's a somatic reaction to that type of interacting with people. Divisive speech, which includes gossip and things like that. And so, again, it's not right versus wrong. There might be a place in our life for harsh speech, right? If we're a parent and our child is going to touch the stove, right? It's appropriate to use harsh speech then for their protection. Idle speech might have an appropriate place in our life. Perhaps, a friend of ours was in an accident and we're accompanying them on the way to the hospital. Perhaps it's appropriate just to use this idle speech to take their mind off of what they're experiencing. Right? Oh, did you catch the Yankees game yesterday? Oh, how about that home run? That was amazing. This kind of speech that doesn't really go anywhere. Did you see the latest Dexter episode? Whatever it is. Right? So, appropriate speech, appropriate idle speech, appropriate divisive speech. If you're a politician and you're good at politics, there might be a place for divisive speech. So, again, we're not holding up this model of how we think we should talk and try to live into that model. Because that takes us right out of the present moment, right? Those models were given to us from the past. And again, these practices are really designed to allow us to engage in the present moment fully. So I'll talk a little bit about the next limb here. The Pali word, the Sanskrit word or term, samakamanta. This is appropriate action. Now, traditionally, appropriate action is given with 5 precepts. Again, these aren't rules to live by, but more invitations to bring mindfulness to these very, very common ways of engaging in the world, in our life. The first one is non-harming. And that, in some traditions, is offered as not killing or not taking life. I prefer not harming. I think that's more encompassing. It's been serving my practice well. So I offer that, non-harming. The second precept, not taking what is not given, very commonly rephrased as not stealing. But I like this, not taking what is not given, because, again, it's more encompassing, right? We can often, take somebody's time. Well, it gets kind of gray if we're just using the phrase not stealing, right? But if somebody didn't, give us their time, if we need somebody to talk to, or if we want to bounce something off of somebody, we might just walk up to somebody and say, hey, what do you think of this? Right? That wasn't freely given. Right? So if we're really practicing samakamanta, we might approach that person and say, do you have a few minutes? I need to bounce an idea off of you. And then if they say yes, okay. If they say no, that's also okay. But now we're in the practice. We're being mindful. Could also be like plagiarism. is another way of taking what is not given freely. You know, and you see this on the internet all the time. You know, people, you know, take these, memes. It's a quote from the Buddha, a quote from Jesus, or a quote from Gandhi, and or a quote from some other writer, and they put it on some picture and they post it as if they wrote it. And that's, that's not being mindful. That's taking what is not given. So there are many ways of looking at this second precept of not stealing. The third precept is not engaging in sensual conduct. Now this is often given as not engaging in harmful sexual conduct. And that's, I think very, very straightforward. Right? Generally, not engaging in sexual misconduct means any type of sexual behavior that causes suffering for yourself and or for others. So when we open that up to sensual misconduct, it could be, overeating, right? Eating is one of our senses. One of the sense doors is the mouth. Or playing music that's so loud that your neighbor can't sleep. Also a type of sensual misconduct. So here, the invitation is to bring that mindfulness to all of the senses. Are we engaging in the world through our sense doors in a mindful way? The last two, refraining from heedless intoxicants. And, there's a lot of room here. There's been so much research lately on, what might have been considered heedless intoxicants 10 years ago. Now we see there's a lot of studies around the medical benefits of these substances. And, if, smoking a certain plant medicine or drinking a certain plant medicine or taking a type of chemical such as MDMA can heal people from trauma or alleviate symptoms from chemotherapy, then I think, from my perspective, that's great. I don't think that falls under the umbrella of heedless intoxicants. That's just my take. There are probably other teachers who might disagree. So that is samakamanta, or appropriate action. And my teacher, when we spoke about samakamanta, my teacher said, as long as your actions support a lifestyle which are conducive to your own meditation practice, you're good. It's very challenging to have a healthy meditation practice when you're not living in a mindful way. If you're causing suffering to others, you're causing suffering to yourself, that's going to come up in your meditation, and it's going to burn. It's going to feel really challenging to sit with your own mind when your own mind is rolling in the actions that you did, causing suffering to yourself and to others. So I find that to be a really helpful gauge. If you can sit in your meditation, whether you're meditating 5 minutes, 10 minutes, a half an hour, multiple hours, if you can be in that space with your own mind, with your own thoughts, and it's peaceful, it's calm, it's blameless, then you're probably in line with Samakamanta, appropriate action. So that might be helpful to some of us who are listening here today. So moving on to the last branch of the ethics branch or limb of the Eightfold Path here, Sama Ajiva is the Pali term, the Sanskrit term, and this means appropriate livelihood. And this is really directly related to appropriate action. And so, as I mentioned last week, all of these limbs of the Eightfold Path support and are related to each other. But here we can really see how that's very connected. If you're living a life of appropriate action, your livelihood will likely follow, right? That's logical. So just kind of a few ways that this is spoken about in the early discourses of the Buddha. Avoiding actions which cause harms as a way of making a living, such as not dealing in arms, not dealing in living beings, not dealing in poisons or intoxicants, and being sensitive to the interdependent nature of the human experience, that we're all interdependent and interrelated. And so really being sensitive to that when we go to make our livelihood. And so again, if your livelihood, if your job, your employment allows you to meditate peacefully, you're probably good. If you don't have a, guilt coming up about, the ways you're making your living while you're in meditation, you're probably okay. You're in the frame of that mindful Eightfold Path. So I'm moving on now to the final dimension, the final three limbs of the Eightfold Path here. And this is the meditative dimension. Samadhi is the Sanskrit term, the Pali term. And samadhi literally means like a collectiveness of mind. Some translators translate samadhi as concentration. Yes and no. It's more of a way of collecting our present moment awareness to engage in the here and now. That's samadhi. But when we're referring to the Eightfold Path, it's really referring to this meditative dimension, these three limbs of the Eightfold Path. And so the first of these three limbs is Samavayana. My Pali is really struggling. I need to practice my Sanskrit. So Samavayana, appropriate effort. And this is effort in regards to the meditative mind. So in the tradition, in the Buddhist tradition, there were given 4 ways of appropriate effort. The first is making sure that unskillful or unwholesome states do not arise in the mind. And if you have a meditation practice, you kind of know what this might look like. If you're meditating and you start to have, unwholesome states arising, unwholesome thoughts, the task then is just to let that go. We don't push it away. We don't want to fall into any kind of repression. But we just notice it and say, maybe I don't need to follow that. That's unwholesome. The Buddha actually said, he saw the thoughts that would lead to suffering for himself and or suffering to others, and he was able to let those go. And then embarking on a path which will allow us to weaken the unskillful states which have already arisen. And so if we notice in our life that we're following certain unskillful or unwholesome ways of being, or ways of being that are causing suffering, we recognize those. Say, oh, I shouldn't do that. Not in a pejorative way. You know, we could very easily fall into beating ourselves up, right? In these traditions, there's no right and wrong. It's just wholesome and unwholesome, or skillful and unskillful. Skillful states allow us to grow and evolve and flourish. Unskillful states keep us trapped in a repetitive cycle of existence, keep us trapped in suffering. So here we're discerning the behaviors and the states of mind which allow us to flourish and to grow. As opposed, and recognizing, it's equally important to recognize the unwholesome so we can, you know, learn to weaken those, right? If we just leave them in the unconscious, they'll continue to run our life. This is all a part of appropriate effort. And then, as I mentioned, recognizing and developing the wholesome states, the skillful states, and then maintaining a way of life which allows those skillful and wholesome states to flourish. Now, a big part of this appropriate effort is recognizing when we're working too hard or not working enough. When we're trying too hard or exerting too much effort and exerting too little effort, and finding the balance point between those two. So that's a big part of this appropriate effort as well, is learning to feel. You know, we don't want to, you know, meditate so much and study so much and really pour ourselves into these teachings and then leading us to burnout. That's not good either, right? Because then we do that for a month, 2 months, 3 months, and then we never want to meditate again. We look at a meditation cushion, we're like, looks like a torture device, right? That's not good. At the same time, we don't want to, you know, say I'm going to go meditate and then go fall asleep on the couch. Unless you really need a nap, and that's okay. So the idea is to find and create a balance in between trying too much and trying too little. And then sustain that balance. Okay, moving on to the next limb of the Eightfold Path here. This is Samasati in Sanskrit or Pali. Sati is the Sanskrit word or the Pali word that is most often translated into mindfulness. I often like to mention to people that this word could equally be translated as heartfulness. So Samasati is appropriate mindfulness or appropriate heartfulness. So equally putting one's mind on the breath, for example, and one's heart on the breath. Some teachers like to say mind-heart, awareness with the mind and heart. So this is really cultivating that ability through mindfulness practices or heartfulness practices, if you wish. And these practices are really kind of sweeping the world right now. They're in abundance, available in abundance. You know, mindfulness stress reduction courses and mindfulness-based recovery, all kinds of mindfulness-based practices are available. Or if you prefer a more, you know, religious-based structure, these practices are heavily emphasized in the Buddhist traditions, in the Zen traditions, also in Vedanta, Hinduism, and contemplative Christianity as well. All have this component of mindfulness practice. Another aspect of Samasati that's often overlooked, though, is the aspect of remembering. And so one often asks them, well, remembering, I thought these practices were about being in the present moment. What's remembering got to do with it? Fair enough, right? It's a good question. So here we're really invited to remember the breath. When we get distracted, recognizing that the distraction from the present moment is a part of the practice of samasati. We're all going to get distracted. We're wired to be distracted as human beings. Because, 15,000 years ago when we were living in caves, if we were able to be completely focused on creating the fire to cook our dinner, the lion would have attacked us and killed us. If we were, trained to be completely focused on hunting that zebra, the neighboring clan of cannibals would have come in and killed us. So our nervous system is wired to have this kind of hypervigilance. So appropriate mindfulness is recognizing that we don't need to be hypervigilant any longer. Unless we're in danger, then of course that type of vigilance is appropriate. Remember, appropriate mindfulness. But here we're really kind of encouraged to step away from that type of vigilance so that we can bring this mindful awareness, this heartful awareness to whatever is arising in the present moment experience. And then remembering to come back when we're distracted unnecessarily. Now, sati also has this component of remembering what's important to us. And, if what's important to us is speaking mindfully, to remember to, in the next conversation, to listen to the sound of your own voice while you're speaking. If what's important to you is, creating a appropriate livelihood, then remembering that when you're looking for your next job, for example. And so here an aspect of this mindfulness is remembering the frameworks of our life that are important to us and living into those frameworks. And then the final of the Eightfold Path here, Samadhi, appropriate unification of the mind. This is really speaking to the practice of meditation itself. Samadhi is speaking to a type of stillness of the mind, which is actually always there. We always have this aspect of stillness in our mind, although perhaps some people listening here might debate that. There's always a quality of stillness in the mind. It's just very often covered up by the incessant chatter, the incessant stream of thinking. But just like the present moment experience always has this component of silence, it's just covered up by the stream of sound. Just in the same way, our internal experience always has a component of stillness, of silence. And it's a very similar thing that we get hypnotized. Our ears get hypnotized by the sound. We get, drawn in by the objects in the aural field, the sounds of the aural field. And so we very often overlook the silence that's there. Just in the same way, in our thinking mind, our awareness gets hypnotized by our thoughts, right? So much so that we think that's who we are. Many people, most people, believe they are their thoughts. So we're so tied into the thinking process that we overlook the stillness of the mind. So in this 12-week course that I'm offering, we'll be taking a very deep dive into practices which allow us to reconnect with that stillness. The Samadhi, this appropriate unification of mind, also includes a type of gatheredness, a collectedness of mind. And it's quite lovely in the Buddhist traditions where this comes from, this practice comes from. They talk about the mind collecting around an experience of joy. And so, it doesn't have to be this kind of dry collecting the mind on the breath, which is a great practice. It's a practice that I do. But also, it can be kind of inspiring, to recognize that these teachings also have this component of rejoicing. And so we take the experience of joy as a focus of meditation. And then we allow the mind, or we invite our mind to collect and gather around the experience of joy. And in Pali, that's known as the Jhanas. There are 4 levels of jhana, which I'm not going to go into today. But the first 2 levels of jhana are directed around and really focused on this quality of joy, of rejoicing. And how great, that this program is being offered throughout the holiday season, right? Because there's so much joy. Even if you don't feel joy around the holidays, there's so many songs about joy in the holiday repertoire this time of year, right? All of these songs about joy and peace and coming together. How great that we can engage in a practice, a meditative practice around joy. To me, it seems almost seasonal, festive, this practice of Samadhi. So that's the ennobling eightfold path in a nutshell. Now, I ran through that very quickly. I went through the first 2 limbs in the last 20 minutes of a talk I gave last week. Appropriate view and appropriate intention. And then I ran through the 6 remaining limbs of the eightfold path here. And it was really kind of a bus tour. But we're going to spend a lot of time over 12 weeks really taking a deep dive into the eightfold path, which is really an invitation to bring mindful awareness and an appropriate measure to all aspects of life, all ways of engaging in life. Our view, our intention, our speech, our action, our livelihood, our effort, our mindfulness, our concentration, Samadhi. So I know I've been drawing quite a bit on the Buddhist tradition here, but just a little bit more about my offerings. When I teach, I generally teach to all audiences. I don't limit these teachings to Buddhists. And as I said at the beginning of this talk, the Buddha wasn't a Buddhist, and he wasn't teaching to Buddhists. And so these teachings are really applicable to all belief systems, all religions, or if you're atheist or agnostic, no problem. All are welcome. So again, if you're interested to sign up for the program, all of the information is on my website, suchsweetthunder.org, or you could just send me a message through Messenger or an email through the website, and I'll get you registered and signed up. thank you all for tuning into this, whether you're tuning in live or you're watching by video. I love giving these talks. I could talk about these teachings for days and days and days, as some of you probably know. And I couldn't do it without an audience, right? So I really appreciate your energy, your time, and your willingness to engage in these practices. So wherever you are, whatever time it is, have a great day, great evening, a great night, a great weekend. Have a great Thanksgiving if you celebrate Thanksgiving. Great holiday season. And I'll ring the bell to close us out. Thank you.